This is a Toyota CHR. It's received quite a lot of criticism from journalists and from motoring websites. Even in a survey by consumerreports.org, they found that only 29% of customers would buy one again. That is ridiculously low. But what is it about the car that most people hate? And can it be that bad? Let me start off with talking about the looks. The look of the car is very unique and very quirky. The front of the car has very aggressive sloping lines, and Car Throttle even noticed that it looks a bit like Darth Vader. And I must say I do see the resemblance, but that doesn't make this car cool. That's not a Darth Vader impression, I'm just asthmatic. The rear of the car though has been terribly overstyled in my opinion. There's just so much going on, but the exterior look of the car was not something that the owners complained about in that survey. After all, you would assume that the owners would look at the car before buying it. Let's move on to the interior. The interior is a little bit quirky, but nowhere near as quirky as the outside. There's this kind of diamond theme that's going on in the interior. I don't like or dislike it, it's just there really. The climate controls are controlled by these switches, and whilst I do prefer a rotary dial, this is far better than a touchscreen system. Infotainment is alright. I'm not a fan of the layout and the user friendliness. The shortcut buttons on the side are very thin as well, so it's hard to use while moving. The system in the Kia Niro, which I reviewed previously, was far better. Practicality in terms of storage space is okay. You have 2 cup holders, decent size in the glove box. But I'm not a big fan of this center area. The 2 cup holders are spaced really far apart for some reason, and then the platform in the back there is just quite useless. I'll be honest. Things just come flying out, and if you have an open drink, it's just going to go into your drink. However, practicality in terms of rear space is not good at all. I'm 6'1" and I could just about sit behind myself. Not only that, it's very dark and dingy in the back. The rear windows are quite small because of the design, so it does get quite dark in there. And the rear passenger space is one of the major things that owners complained about. Boot space is okay. It might be a bit smaller compared to the class average, but it's not a major issue. Now let me move on to the drive. You have a 1.8 litre engine that produces around 120 horsepower, then a 2 litre engine which makes around 180, so a significant amount more. This is the 1.8 litre. It does 0 to 60 in above 11 seconds, and the performance is something that owners complained about. They complained that the 1.8 litre was just too slow. And I would say I agree. Personally, I would think a car with 120 brake would be a little bit more brisk, but because it is a hybrid crossover, it's a little bit heavier compared to normal cars, so the performance is a little bit lackluster. It teases you a little bit because you do feel the initial torque from the hybrid system, but then the engine doesn't really help to do anything. In terms of the suspension, I would say it was very well balanced because this car is very agile. In fact, out of all the crossovers I have driven, I'd say this is the best handling. There's not a lot of body roll at all in corners, and for some reason the car just feels so light in the corners. I can feel a little bit of the weight under braking, but somehow the handling just masks the weight so well. But that doesn't make the car uncomfortable either. The car is still very comfortable. I really like the steering as well. The steering is very light and predictable, and it makes the car very easy to maneuver, which brings me on to visibility. The front visibility isn't that good at all. The A-pillars are very obtrusive, and then the view out the front windshield is very narrow. The dashboard seems to go on forever, and then just the view out the front is very narrow. The rear visibility isn't that great either because of the way the rear has been styled, but that doesn't really impair the maneuverability that much because all cars do come with a rear parking camera as standard. But another thing that owners would complain about a lot is the noise that the engine makes. When the engine kicks in, it does not sound nice whatsoever, and the engine does kick in quite a lot. Even when you want to go a little bit briskly, the engine will just kick in and it doesn't make a nice noise. In terms of wind and tyre noise, I would say the tyre noise is around average, but I don't really hear that much wind noise, which is good. The speakers aren't very good though. Let me talk about the fuel economy. How you feel about the fuel economy will depend on what you compare it to. So the car claims around 60 miles per gallon, and in the real world it gets around 50, which by normal standards might sound good. But when you compare it to other hybrids and other crossovers, then it's around average. But then when you compare it to Toyota standards, it's not as good. So for example, the Toyota Prius shares the same platform and the same hybrid system, and that claims 200 plus miles per gallon, but obviously nobody's going to get that. But in the real world, it does get around 70 to 80. And then the Toyota Yaris and the Yaris Cross also have better economy figures. So by Toyota hybrid standards, it's nothing to really write home about. Really, the only thing this car has going for it is the handling and agility. But apart from that, I'm struggling to think of any other good points for this car. In terms of what I dislike about it, personally, I'm not a huge fan of the looks, especially of the rear. The second thing, visibility out the front is a huge issue for me. And a car that has around 120 horsepower, it does not feel that fast. The engine doesn't really sound that nice. One thing I'm not a big fan of though is the driving position. I like to sit a little bit back, but there's not a lot of play in the length of the steering wheel, so my arms have to be extended all the time. I'm not a big fan of the braking feel either. It's a bit sensitive, so at low speeds you're kind of like jittering around. Another thing, I could not start it for the life of me. I'm pretty sure this is just an issue with this car, however it was not starting whatsoever. I had to hold the key directly next to the power button for the key to actually be detected. I'll show you what I mean. Depress brake pedal and push power switch to start. You'll never amount to anything. You're useless. In terms of my conclusion, this car is very weird. It looks very quirky. It handles quite well. But then from there, everything kind of falls apart. It's not practical. Rear passenger space is very poor. This 1.8 litre is very slow. The engines make a very unpleasant groaning noise. To answer the question at the start, is the car actually that bad? That will depend on who you are and what you're looking for in a car. But yeah, I do think that the looks of the car are writing checks that the rest of the car just can't cash. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.